Welcome to the Mystery Review crew and the story behind the story. Today we've got author Jody Hadlock, whose debut novel, The Lives of Diamond Bessie, has only recently come out, and she's having grand results. A lot of interaction with readers. It's just been a really fun trajectory to watch and a really great read also. Welcome, Jody.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Would you know, most of the people who watch these interviews enter either through mystery, like a book with mystery in its DNA, and some combination of that with history. Sometimes recently we talked to Michelle Cox, who sort of weaves in romance with that also. So would you give us kind of like the DNA of your debut novel before we get started?
Yes, it's not straight historical fiction. That's the main genre, but it's also part mystery, but it's more of a whodunit than a whodunit. And it also is a ghost story. So it's cross-genre fiction, but mystery is a big part of it. And It's based on a true crime that happened in 19th century Texas. But the story is also in other places in the country. It's not just solely set in Texas.
Yeah. Well, with you've kind of got the mashup going on, the mashup of genres, which I keep being drawn to other authors who do that because I can't stop myself from doing it too. And before we get into the nuts and bolts about this novel, what do you think it is about you as a writer that draws you to use different elements of storytelling to make this book?
Well, for me, it was the way the story needed to be told. I didn't set out to write historical fiction, mystery, slash paranormal. As the story evolved, that's what it ended up being. And I think it's best serves the story. So that was really the driving, factor in that.
And when you say the story, I assume, based on everything I've talked to you about and read about, that you began with the real life of Diamond Bessie, and that was your starting point. And then you decided to weave these different elements in order to properly tell her story. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. It's based on a real person. She was a 19th century prostitute, or demi-mondaine is the more elegant term for a prostitute.
I'm going to use that.
Yeah. And so not much was known about her life leading up to a certain event in the book. And so I had to really fictionalize a lot of that. But I luckily found the memoirs of 3 19th century prostitutes that really informed the first part. So it's a very accurate portrayal of the way life was for a demi-mondaine, the reasons why a woman became a prostitute, et cetera, what their life was like, especially at the first class parlor houses. So yeah, so there's that. And then there's a true crime involved. So I also had to research that. And it's has these, I don't want to give away the plot twist. There's a major plot twist.
Yeah.
And readers either love it or hate it. There's no in between.
Well, so let's start with, you mentioned the true crime. So let's start with that. First of all, can you tell us the core part of the true crime, or do you feel that'll give them?
No, I think I can, because I can, because it won't spoil it for readers that don't know anything about the story. She was murdered in Jefferson, Texas, and that's in Northeast Texas in 1877. And back then, Jefferson was an inland river port in Northeast Texas, which seems crazy, but back then the waters were navigable from New Orleans to Shreveport over to Jefferson. So that was the last place that she visited. And the town still remembers her. They have a play about her every year. There have been songs written about her, nonfiction books, but this is the first novel.
Oh, I love it. What is it about her that would capture the spirit of the whole town?
I think is when it was even though it was a huge gateway to Texas, because it's in north, it's close to the Louisiana border. It was a small town, and people didn't appreciate a woman being murdered in their town, basically using it as a dumping ground. Mm-hmm. And they really rallied around her. And I don't want to give away, all the plot story, but they really tried to seek justice for her. Yeah. And it's interesting I think, whenever, I don't want to give away everything, but whenever there's an injustice, people tend to remember that more.
Yeah.
Like if you think about the O.J. Simpson trial of in the 1990s, I used to say that my story it's the O.J. Simpson trial of 19th century Texas.
Fascinating.
Yeah, but it's been so long since that trial that I don't use that comparison really anymore. But I think
in real life, is Diamond Bessie also quite beautiful? Because I'm thinking as a demi-monde that she would have been.
Yes, she was beautiful, and she had, of course, getting her sobriquet Diamond Bessie. She garnered a lot of jewels from her paramours over the years. So she had two. One was a large diamond, and the other was a cluster of diamonds. These two rings, and so she just got it. Oh, and she dressed very fashionably. I mean, like Charles Frederick Worth kind of, house of, Paris kind of couture. And so when she came to Jefferson, everybody noticed her.
Yeah.
And then, then when she was killed and her murderer, left town, and then that starts, this whole chain of things that happened.
Well, it's interesting in our little neck of the woods, writing wise, in terms of crime and true crime and historical crime. It is a thing that sometimes bothers us. It's a dead girl. You know what I mean? So often the attractive crime fiction involves a dead girl. And it's in particular, if she's beautiful. I mean, if we looked back through crime novels and obviously crime television and crime movies and so on, the beauty of the victim and her, especially if she's on the younger side, is something that readers and viewers find compelling. And it's kind of a problem, but it seems like the vulnerability of someone like that makes them an attractive victim for people.
She was in her mid-20s, and of course, beautiful. And I know exactly what you're saying, because, okay, if she was not pretty, if she had not garnered all that attention because of the way she looked, would there have been that much, attention to the crime?
I was watching last night the January 6th hearings. And one of the things that hit me right away was when they pulled in one of the Capitol Police to testify first. And she'd had a traumatic head injury and she was attacked. It was really terrible what she experienced. And she was very brave. And also she was stunningly beautiful and dewy. And I felt myself feeling, well, that was smart, because people are going to care more about someone like this who had been attacked than someone that doesn't raise the emotions as much. So anyway, I was just thinking about Diamond Bessie and her beauty, and that's part of it. She's kind of riveting that way.
Yes. And, unfortunately, that's, the way it is.
Yeah, it is. It's not just in the fiction. It's in the true annals of history. So, how, when you sorted out, it seems to me, and everything I've read in this book and about the book and heard you interviewing with other people, it seems like a big part of it is the history element to you, and that you kind of got attached to Diamond Bessie early on. Do you have an idea why it was that you originally attached to this figure?
Well, I always wanted to write a novel. I just didn't know what I wanted to write.
Yeah.
And when my husband and I were dating, he's from East Texas, Marshall, and we came to meet his parents, and he said, let's go over to Jefferson. I hadn't heard of Jefferson, even though I'd grown up around Dallas. And he said it was an inland river port. And I was like, what are you talking about in, far northeast Texas?
Yeah.
And we went over there and went to the historical museum. And I was walking down an aisle, and there at the end, there was this display case with a full-page newspaper article about Diamond Bessie and Abe Rothschild. It was in a Dallas paper in the 1930s about something that had happened in this small town 3 hours away, about 60 years earlier. And I thought, why was this paper still interested? And then I had another thought, but that just, I knew right at that moment that I had found the story that I wanted to write. And at the time, I was used to be a TV news reporter and anchor, and I was in Charleston, South Carolina. And I made a vow that when I moved back to Texas, that I would look into the story and see if it would make a good novel. But instinctively, my gut told me that it would make a good novel. And then when I started researching it, it was even more fascinating than I ever thought possible. And so I try to capture some of that. And there's some things in there that I was able to fictionalize that really happened, but, do it in a fictional way. And actually in the paranormal part of the book. And it's, it's incredible, everything that happened. Sometimes, sometimes the truth is, I say, not just stranger than fiction, but more fascinating than fiction.
Yeah. And I also think about the, paranormal or fantastical or not conventionally recognized or experienced. I just periodically, the more time that goes by in my life, the more I realize if somebody a while ago told me that I could pick this up and talk to someone in China very easily, I would have thought they were nuts, or that I could take pictures and show it to my parents in another town. So things that are now taken for granted were magical at one time, or mysterious, or superstitious. And so the more I read and the more I talk to people and their actual experience, the more I am open to possibilities that I can't pin down yet. When my husband's grandfather died, in the night before he died, he was saying, "Oh, I can't wait. I talk to my wife every day." And my husband said, "Oh, do you think about her every day?" He goes, "No, I talk to her. She tells me she's got everything ready." And then, after he passed, we thought, well, maybe he is talking to her. Who are we to say? Who are we to say that we can control what's real and what isn't? So I love that. I love this about you and your writing, that you are kind of porous and open enough to all the parts of human experience that can shape a story. I really welcome it and enjoyed it in the novel.
Oh, good. Thank you. I love research. I love the story. And I think, anytime you are going to embark on such a involved project, I think you have to be really passionate for it to see it all the way through.
I think you're right. Some people call that passion crazy, Jody. I just don't.
Well, I had somebody accuse me of being obsessed with Diamond Bessie.
Yeah, I heard that. I believe.
And then I mentioned that to my editor, and she said, "Well, you kind of need to be." I was like, "Okay, now I feel better. I don't feel so, like a crazy person."
Well, what's related to that in the sort of a writing craft kind of way, one time I heard a piece of advice that I really love that kind of applies to what you do in the Lives of Diamond Bessie. An advisor was saying, everybody will tell you to write what you know. What I say is write what you want to know, because then you'll be obsessed enough to do the digging to figure it out. So you didn't have to know about Diamond Bessie to be the right person to tell her story. You had to want to know about Diamond Bessie.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I say write what you're interested in.
Yeah.
Well, for me, it always starts with the why, or in the how. Like, why did this happen? How did this happen? And then I'm often running.
One of the things that you mentioned about the early part of the book that I really love is how I get immersed in that world of I can't remember the phrase you used to define, like a brothel that's kind of higher class.
Oh, first class parlor house.
First class parlor house. So I wasn't familiar with that. There was one other novel I read that sort of touched on it. I don't know if you read the Emma Donahue book that dealt with the great earthquake in San Francisco. They have kind of that same setting for the beginning.
Yes. Yes. Then you're talking about frog music.
Yeah. Oh, okay. No, it's the one.
Not that.
No, it's the one after that. I think it.
Okay. Okay. I'll have to look it up. But I'm very familiar with her.
Yeah. But one of the things that was really fascinating to me, just in addition to all the details that you include, the sensory details and the historical details, was to think about the relative amounts of agency a woman might have in that setting. Like, I was thinking, when she is there, does she have more or less control over her life than she did in the convent where she was put as a pregnant person, and more or less control than she did in her parents' home?
It's really interesting because women back then had so many restrictions, but it was the women who were the fringe of society, working as a demi-mondaine, a prostitute at a brothel, a first-class parlor house. They were the ones that they were more financially independent. Right. So they were financially independent and they traveled more freely than other women, but they were ostracized. So, there was a trade-off.
Yeah, it's kind of like the social price you pay. And of course, there's all kinds of danger and risk in the life that Diamond Bessie was living, not through really a choice of her own. I mean, she chooses it, but it's really the only real choice available to her.
And that's the way it was, because it really came down to economics. It was just a means of survival. I found the memoirs for 3 19th century prostitutes that were just fascinating, and that really informed the first part of the novel. And it was all, there's so many stories of women who were like well-educated, maybe even came from good homes. But if you were a fallen woman, if you'd had sex outside of marriage and God forbid got pregnant, I mean, you had no chance of redeeming yourself. And it was like, you had a one-way ticket to a brothel. And then, a woman may have been abandoned by her husband and had all these children to feed. And there were so many different stories like that of women. It wasn't that they grew up wanting to be a prostitute. It's because they needed to survive. And a lot of times they were like a part-time prostitute. They would go to assignation houses, and that's a place for illicit sex. And they would, meet men there. And it could be that maybe there's somebody having an affair. It wasn't just a place for like a brothel. It was a meeting place for people who wanted to have illicit sex, whether it was outside of marriage or a part-time prostitute, to make money. And, so that was the way, a lot of women had to survive.
Yeah, it's like they're being kicked out of polite society and pushed toward the edges. Then they find a way to survive, and then they're judged about that survival route. But I also kind of wonder, in the Victorian England, which was so quote unquote morally rigorous, it was kind of just part of the system to have prostitution, because it wasn't going to work if everybody acted the way they were supposed to according to that morality. So the houses of prostitution were a necessary component of the system.
And they were everywhere. I looked at a map of Chicago from the mid 1800s, and there were saloons and brothels everywhere, like almost on every corner.
Yeah.
And, obviously today we don't have that, but the way society was back then, and the lack of rights and lack of opportunities for women, pushed them into that. And then, of course, men were more than happy to patronize them.
Right. Well, yeah. That's interesting. Where I live in Sacramento, there's something called, we have Old Sacramento, which is supposedly preserved the way it was, during the gold rush days and so on. But they have something called the Underground Tour. And that's where Sacramento was built too low and it flooded. In 1861, our governor, I think it was Governor Leland Stanford, who had to row from the governor's mansion in a rowboat to the Capitol for his inauguration because the whole city was flooded.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So what they did was they basically poured dirt, 30 feet of dirt, and then they rebuilt the city on top of the old city. And now there are areas that have been cleaned out where you can literally go to the city that existed below our current city. And, I've taken that tour and almost everything's a brothel. Almost everything is a brothel close to the river where people would work, So,
I want to come out to Sacramento and see this. This sounds fascinating.
This is just a little, temptation I'm sticking out there for you to get you out here and do a book visit. But that's fascinating. Another thing I like about the way you're describing this is something that rings true for me is how it was almost a gift that parts of Diamond Bessie's experience were not available to you. You didn't have records for it. So it was like an invitation to fictionalize it. And of course, you went to source material. You went to these memoirs to find really authentic information so you wouldn't be just making out of whole cloth. But that opportunity to find a little crack in the history and to go there, that's a wonderful opportunity for you to get at something beyond fact, something that's closer to truth.
Well, and what's interesting about those memoirs is that all three of them, there were difficulties publishing them because they were prostitutes in the latter part of the 19th century. So later in life, in the early 1900s, they wrote their stories. One of them, she self-published because she couldn't find a publisher. The other one found an editor who was interested, who couldn't convince his publisher to publish it. It sat in a drawer for like 30 or 40 years and was finally published in 1970. And then the third one was published by Harper and Brothers in 1919. It's Madeline, an autobiography. It caused such a scandal, it led to a lawsuit, and the publisher was fined $1,000, withdrew the book from circulation, didn't appear again for 70 years. So I'm so grateful to these women for penning their stories. They knew at the time that to get material like that published was really an uphill battle, but they still took the time to write their stories. And thank God they did, because they still survive. And because without that, you really wouldn't have an inside look at that part of life at that time.
Who could tell that story, that history, other than them? It had to be them to get it right.
Oh, and one of them in her memoir, she made fun of the fiction writers. I'm sure mainly the men and the novelists in the 19th century that she was like, the way they describe this is just ridiculous. Like they were these princesses in these palaces, and there was an unrealistic portrayal of demi-mondaines for the most part in 19th century literature.
Right, I'm sure. Now, this is something I think and worry a lot about when you're dealing with historical material and real life people. What kind of freedom? Like, did you worry a lot? I love what you've done about fictionalizing the early parts you have no access to. Did it make you anxious to write in these places where you're dealing with real lives and names and you have to invent?
Not really, because I put myself, it's first person point of view. I put myself in her shoes. Yeah. And then of course my source material, really, really helped tremendously. Yeah. And there was enough coverage after her murder that, hundreds of newspapers, there were thousands of stories about her. So there was from certain point on, there was a lot. And then I was able to inform the before, and it just really by the time I started writing, really, the story was evolving. I felt comfortable writing her and the other characters.
I'm wondering how a lot of times people I talk to who write historical work, um, they start to feel reverberations with now. And I wonder if you felt any of that telling her story.
What do you mean as far as reverberations
I mean,
now?
like, is there something in Diamond Bessie's historical crime story that connects for you with our current day?
I think it's mainly with the injustice. Whenever there's an injustice and a story is usually remembered longer, but also, well, it made me actually appreciate how far women have come. I mean, I know there's always room for progress, but I really learned a lot about the way life was back then. And then, because that informs the present.
Mm-hmm.
The past always informs the present. And it's really important to know how we got to where we are.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you can do that with studying history. So, I just, I think it's really important.
I know that you just recently were at a big celebration at the Carnegie Library in Jefferson, which looked really wonderful. And I assume there's a lot of local people there who were really invested in this. And do you think they came to you like, oh, isn't this fun to find out more? Or are they like, you got that detail wrong? Or actually, I think what happened was.
Well, there is something. So her murder was 145 years ago. And there's been a rumor about Diamond Bessie since then that she was a woman named Annie Stone. She was not Annie Stone, but a lot of people in the town, because that rumor has been around for so long and her identity wasn't proven until just more recently, that people have held on to that belief that she was just Annie Stone. So I include Annie Stone in homage to her in my book. And I explain I have a detailed afterward. So, I really explain what's fact and fiction. And, with Annie, that she wasn't Annie Stone. So I don't think people have, I had the event just very recently. So, and people were buying my book there. So I didn't get any feedback as far as, details being wrong. But I have to say, I've done so much research that I hate to say it, but I know more than anybody in the town about Diamond Bessie.
You're pretty confident.
I'm very confident that nobody's going to come up to me and say, okay, a detail I may have gotten wrong is, I'm sure you do so much research. Well, for yours, you have to do a lot of research. And I'm sure I got something wrong, but it probably was not about Diamond Bessie.
That's great. I wonder if you've this story, Diamond Bessie's story, captured your heart and, made you invest in it for years to get this thing written. And I know you're a writer who's going to keep writing. That's where you are now. You've always been a journalist, and now you're moving to this novelist. I assume you're going to continue writing novels. I was wondering if you might also be bitten by the true crime bug as a writer.
Well, that's interesting because I do. I love, I don't say fascinated by true crime stories. And my husband and I, we probably watched every true crime series
Yeah.
and, ever done. I think there's, it's why does somebody cross that line and commit, this atrocity?
Back to the why done it.
Yeah. The why done it. Why? So I'm interested in that, but my next story will not be true crime. Unless you count the Civil War. I am interested in writing about somebody in history who was very prominent during the Civil War, a woman. But I'm also interested in writing about two other women. But the next book, it'll still be set in the 1800s.
Okay.
Mid to late 1800s. So I'll stick with historical fiction.
Yeah.
But who knows, beyond that, I'll come back to true crime.
Yeah. And also staying with that Civil War era, I find myself that once you've done the work in one book, to get really comfortable in a time period, it's so comfortable to re-enter that same period and then create new characters, but you feel really confident in that period. So I can understand that preference.
Well, yeah, either you have to do so much research that I can see that if all of a sudden I wanted to go to the 1500s, oh my gosh, the research I would have to do. And yeah, but fortunately, I'm very drawn to the mid 1800s, just naturally. So thankfully it'll work out.
So many writers, as you know, like to find out from other writers like yourself who's had such a successful debut. If you have learned anything about this writing process on your first book, because I'll admit that my first novel, Copy Boy, took me 10 years to get done. And my second one, really, I wrote it in 6 months. Now it took, it's not taking 6 months after the drafting, but I felt like I learned so much by writing the first one that I discovered some preferences about how to go about writing. And I'm wondering if you, as a writer, have any advice for other writers listening about what you learned about either your writing habits or your writing process or the way you structure a book, anything like that.
Well, what I've learned is that everybody has a different path. Everyone's is unique. And I would always talk to other writers, authors about, their process or, writing routine, et cetera. And everybody's different. And so just follow what feels instinctive to you, basically. I like to write from coffee shops. I like the ambiance, or not just write, but, anything that I'm doing, research, marketing, writing, it doesn't bother me because I used to be a journalist. So being in a newsroom and having all the noise around me, it doesn't bother me. So whereas somebody else might want to be in their office at home, and then some people want to write in the morning, some people write better in the evening. I mean, it just really varies. But I will say that if somebody listening out there is an aspiring author, don't give up. That is the main thing. Because I'm like you, where it took several years. Well, I worked on this book in 2 different time periods.
Yeah.
Learned about it in the 90s, did research, and set it aside for about 12 years for a lot of reasons. Came back to it in 2014. And then I got on the right path, and that took 8 years to publication. So it is a long journey, and you just need to stick with it and not give up. If it's what you want to do, if you have a story to tell and you don't, and it's this burning desire to tell a story and you don't do it, I can tell you that you'll be miserable. Because I've had that feeling, and it's like, I'm just so happy to have Bessie's story out in the world. Yeah. That's really just means so much to me, just to have it out there and hearing from readers who enjoy it.
That passion/obsession is showing, Jody.
Yeah.
It's great. It's part of the fun of it. It really is.
You got to enjoy it. You really do. Yeah. I mean, not that it's not tough. I mean, there were some times where I'd like beat my head on my desk and, why is this so hard? Why am I not getting this? But I hope I'm like you, where the second book, I feel confident that it'll go much faster. So I really know all the research, ins and outs, and writing. Now I know how to write a scene, write character, and there's so many things that you have to learn. And even if you read a lot, because obviously almost everybody who writes novels reads a lot. Yeah. But it's so different from, okay, I read all this and then I sit down to write, and it's just, entirely different. It's just,
there may be, for people who write history for sure, but also crime fiction or true crime, there's a lot of data to keep track of. Do you have a system like, some people use Scrivener and they have all these files in the notes section and they have chapters and scenes in the other section. Do you have a system that you use? Because it gets overwhelming with someone like you who has so many pieces of research to corral.
Well, what I've started to do, I didn't do it with Diamond Bessie because I started that, a long time ago, and I just, my system has changed. I use OneNote. I don't know if you
I haven't
used. So yeah, I use OneNote. I have Scrivener. I haven't used it yet because I was already, when I got it, I was already so far along in writing Bessie's story that I just didn't switch. So I still need to look into that. But yeah, I'm very, very organized. So I, before, I had binders on characters and binders of newspaper articles and, and then, though I will say, there's a lot of talk about whether you're a plotter or a pantser.
Right.
Well, I thought I was a plotter, but I'm really more of a pantser.
Well, in case someone doesn't know what that dichotomy means.
Oh, yeah. Well, because I wrote an outline when I first started to write Bessie's story. I wrote an outline, so I was a plotter. I sat down to write, and then very quickly that outline went out the window. So then I'm flying by the seat of my pants as a pantser. So I actually do kind of a combination where I want to know where I'm headed, but I don't want to have too many details because you need to be able to let the characters go where they want to go.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. So it really is an interesting process.
Yeah. You have to be a little open to serendipity so that you're willing to say, not going to do that anymore. And
you need to have the confidence because it can be real scary because you think, oh, well, if I don't know everything, you don't want to write yourself into a corner or have this big plot hole and how do you fix it? It can be scary, but it just takes that experience and trial and error. And oh my gosh, I probably have so many pages. I am sure I have 10 times more pages that never made it, into the final copy.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even know how many thousands of words.
We should do an anthology called Dead Darlings, where we all submit our really beloved paragraphs that never made it in.
Yes, exactly.
I've always been envious about those writers who you'll see they have a big wall board full of colored charts and sticky notes and so on. And it's so attractive and appealing to me. It looks like beautifully illustrating the shape of the story. And not once have I been able to make that work. I'm just not that orderly in a visual way. So, but I'm hoping someday I'll aspire to sticky notes and colored pens.
I've tried all different ways. I've done that with the cork board and, just in sticky notes and index cards. And I also done some screenwriting.
Oh,
so with that, you're really, that was useful to use the index cards for screenwriting. That's very helpful.
And are you thinking maybe of converting Diamond Bessie's story to the screen or moving on?
I think I'll move on. I don't know if there would ever be any interest in, something about her, a movie about her. One screenplay I wrote, co-wrote. It was my idea. I did all the research and brought somebody on to help co-write it. And it won the 2020 Dallas International Film Festival.
Oh, that's
great.
Fantastic.
And it was almost optioned. We were this close to having it optioned. And that didn't work out, which was fine. I was still, even though it, nothing may have ever happened with it, I'm still really happy that I went on that journey.
Oh my God.
I don't think a creative project, even if it doesn't pan out, is a waste of time. I don't think any creative projects are a waste of time because I need it. That's going to help me with my storytelling in my next novel.
Yeah.
And yeah, it really all does build on each other. It's amazing.
It's grist. Well, Jody, it has been so delightful to talk to you. I'm so glad we were able to squeeze you in your really, really busy launch period.
Oh, I'm not that busy. Well, I was. It's kind of slowing down now. But anyway, it was wonderful to be here. Thank you so much, Shelley. Loved it.
Well, and everybody, I'll have an image of Jody's book up on the website. Oh, you can see it right over her head.
Oh,
the Lives of Diamond Bessie right there. You're going to want to get the paperback or the ebook, and it's available everywhere. Jody, is your website anything other than your name, Jody Hadlock?
No, it's just my name. I'm on Instagram as my name, and then Facebook is Jody Hadlock author. And I do have an audio book too. if somebody likes to listen to
fantastic.
audiobooks.
Is it already out, that audiobook?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
it's out.
Great, great, great. Well, thanks again. It was delightful talking to you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.